Howdy, my name's Don, and I'd like to welcome you to another training session related to the Homeless Management Information System. Today we're going to talk about using the shelter module. So if you're working in a program that houses individuals in our continuum of care, it is very likely that you'll be recording that data in the shelters module of the HMIS. So I'll be covering how we go about the basic process of entering people, entering data about their conditions, and exiting them from the shelter. In our continuum of care, we have a couple of different kinds of shelters. There's what's known as an entry-exit shelter, and that's a situation where people are staying with us for an extended time. It might be one night, but it is likely to be a longer time. So we will enter them into our program, record information about their quality of life and condition, and then keep track of that while they're with us. And then when we exit them, we measure that information again. So that data gets collected over a time span. So an entry-exit shelter is very common. We have a variety of them configured in old hotels or in micro-shelter situations or small structures. And the other kind of shelter that we have in our continuum are known as night-by-night shelters. And then, so those are places where people basically are just coming for a bed at night. They're checked in at a certain time, and then they leave the next day. So we make a record for each time that they spend time with us, each night. So depending on your situation, you'll use this part of our HMIS a little bit differently. In this video, I'll try to cover all the basic techniques for doing your job. So it's always going to start at the home page of Wells Sky. So you'll notice I'm on the main page for my fictitious case manager. They're always going to go to the shelters menu to start this work. So it's important that we use that properly. So I'm going to check in a fictitious client today, and I'm going to click shelters to start with. The next thing that I encounter is the shelter inventory menu. And you'll notice that my provider I'm working for is the Cascade Area Neighbors Agency. Now that is not a shelter, that is just the agency that houses the project, really. So it's a database element. What I want to do is pull that menu down and locate the actual shelter project I'm working for. If you're in a big agency, that'll be an extensive list, and you'll just want to make sure that you're entering someone into the proper place. My agency is small. We only have one emergency shelter. It's known as the Mars Hotel. So when I click there, you're going to notice that a menu will pop up, and now I have features about this particular shelter. It has a unit list menu. And this small shelter only has one main building, but your configuration might be different. You might need to make sure you put the person into the right unit. So always pull that menu down and make the right choice. And then for the most part on the shelter's dashboard, I'm going to be using this big button here that says Client Check-in. Now there are some other options there that you can learn about, and if you need help, reach out to your HMIS staff. We'd be happy to help you. Most of the time we're going to use this button. So I'm going to click that, check that person in today, and you'll notice when I push that, I get an inventory or a unit list of the main building here at the Mars Hotel. So it's organized by family, rooms, men's wing, there's rooms for men and rooms for women. And configurations will vary, but just make sure you know how yours is configured and where you're going to put people. So I have a client that's going to be moving into room 1, and they're going to be in bed 1. I'm going to go over to the very left side, and you'll notice there's a tiny icon there of a bed, and I'm going to push the plus. And that's going to allow me to put them into the bed. So now the database wants to know who are we putting in there. So I have a client we just did an intake with, and their name is Pleasant Person. So they're going into that bed. So I'm going to type their information in. I'm going to do a search. So these techniques are what you probably learned in our introductory video about the HMIS, how to look up a client and how to create a record. So when I do my search, the results are down here. Oh, and sure enough, in client results, there's Pleasant Person, and that's the social security number I have on hand, so that's the person I want to add. Now, if they don't show up in this search, you want to do your due diligence, make sure they're not in our database, and then you could create a new record. Review that video or those training materials if you're not familiar with that process, and just remember we want to make sure that people are not in the database before we enter a new record. But in my case, there they are. They're in my client results. So I'm going to add them to our shelter. I'm going to push plus. Now, the database is going to give me this enter data window, and I'm going to have lots of things to complete to put this person into the room. So it's starting at the top here. You'll notice that I have the option to make sure that I put him in on the right date. My computer just picked up today's date, March 5th, and so I'm going to put them in today. But hey, if I have intake paperwork from last week and I need to put them in, I can change that date. If they came in yesterday, I can change that date. Just be real cognizant that that date is important, and we want to make sure that if we've done any other entry data, that it coordinates with the date I'm putting them into the shelter. Now, as I scroll down, you'll notice there's some fields here where you could put in some information. Some shelters give out supplies like towels or bedding, and if your shelter's keeping track of that, that's fine. If you get a locker, that's fine. You can put notes in here, but we want you to remember this is an open database, so everyone with access in our continuum of care can look at these records. So you don't want to put any private information in here because everyone else will be able to see it. So talk to your HMIS staff at your agency and ask if you put any information in there. For the most part, it's not used. So as I cruise on down, I get a double check that I'm just putting in a single individual. We've got a release of information for them. And I get a chance to double check here that I'm actually putting them into the Mars Hotel. So I want to double check. For some reason, sometimes the database doesn't pick that up. So I'm entering data, it's going into this provider, the Mars Hotel, and I'm using the type HUD. That's a very common type of data in our continuum, but we also have some RI programs and VA programs. So make sure you understand what your agency is using, and if you don't know, reach out to your HMIS staff. We'll be happy to help you. Now I'm going to get to what we know as an assessment. So the OHCS entry here, this is the name of the assessment that we attach to this program. If you work for a while in the HMIS, you'll notice all different kinds of assessments. There's entry assessments, different kinds of those. There's exit assessments, and there's different kinds of those. And then there's even something called an interim review, which is another assessment. Now, when I complete these, I need to fill in every field and choose an answer from every menu. What we'll notice right away about this record is there are no answers in there. So we know this is a brand new person in our database. They've just been entered into the database. I'm the first staff member to put information in about them. So I want to be real accurate and make sure that that is clearly done. Now, if you open up an assessment, you put a person into your shelter and you notice information that has already been completed, that means that that person has been entered into a project at another time in our continuum of care. Our job then is to double check it to make sure that it's accurate. If it is not, feel free to change it. And if you have any questions about how to do that, reach out to your HMIS staff. We'll do a couple of examples today to make sure everybody sees how that's done. So we are going to start with this brand new record for this person, pleasant person. Their relationship to the head of household is important, so I'm going to answer that question. So if you built their household, you know that they are the head of the household. If not, you look that up on some information, but their relationship is that they are themselves. I'm the first person to enter a record, so I'm going to go ahead and put in their birthday. And I'm going to put in a data descriptor, a HUD likes us to describe the data that we're putting in. So there's the birth date. I've got full date of birth. You'll notice there's other options. Partial date of birth is an option if a person doesn't remember the day or the month, or if you have a child or something, and you can pick approximate. But if you have the full date of birth, we're going to put that answer. Sometimes people don't know. Sometimes they'll prefer not to answer, and you just leave it blank if that's the case. Quick reminder, we never use data not collected. Okay, but I have full date of birth. Next, I have race and ethnicity. Now, a person may identify one or more races, and there's some ways to click one or more answers. The person can answer they don't know. that they can't answer that they prefer not to answer. All those are options. We're not going to use data not collected, but in this case, my person is identified as Latina. If they identify something that's not in the list, you can type it in right down here. And so there's plenty of options. Next, there's gender. My person has identified that they are a woman, and I'm ready now to move on to the HUD verification tables. This next set of data will be found on practically every assessment on every program in our HMIS. They are known as the HUD verification tables, and they are a way for us to track the quality of life of our clients while they're in our care. So we're going to measure a few characteristics at the beginning of their stay on entry. So we'll look at disabilities, health insurance, monthly income, and what they call non-cash benefits. We're going to measure those and record some information about those when they enter our project and then when they exit our project. And what we're looking for is, are there any changes in that quality of life while they're under our care? And be aware that if they're with us for a short time, maybe even overnight, that's probably not going to change. But if they're in a long-term project or program, we want to measure those things. And sometimes if people are with us for an extremely long time, we'll even do a measurement in between the entry and the exits. That's known as an interim review. So there's lots to cover when we talk about HUD verification tables. So sit back and watch this whole section. I'm going to do all 4 charts, and we'll talk about how to do a chart for a brand new client in our system and how to double check a chart for someone who's already been in our system for a while. We'll start this part of the work by looking at the structure of these data sets. You'll notice right now that there's no data in these ones at all. That means that this client is brand new in our system, and this part of an assessment has never been done for them. So the first time is pretty important that we put things in there accurately. But you'll also learn on your job that we're going to have to take a look at these for every client. Many clients we'll work with will have already been in our system, and an assessment will have already been done, so there'll be data here. And it's our job to check it to make sure that it's accurate. It's important because we are taking a snapshot of this person's quality of life based on the date we're entering them into our project. So in this tutorial, I'm putting them in on February 20th. And so it's important that we know what condition this person was in, what kind of resources did they have on that exact day. So the database will keep track of things from that moment on. And so it will measure how their quality of life changes while they're with us until they exit from this program. So on this particular day, February 20th, my client has reported that they have a disabling condition. So I'm going to answer yes to that question. You'll notice there's other options there. It could be a yes or a no. Now we also have the opportunity for the client to say they don't know the answer to their question or they prefer not to answer. Now they have the prerogative to do that, but it's important that we try to capture that information, and we need to express to them that it's helpful in providing them services, particularly if they're going to go looking for services that prioritize people with disabilities. So it's important to capture that information here so that it shows up in reports and opportunities for referrals. There is that option, data not collected. And everyone knows we're not going to use that option because that tells HUD and everyone else that we didn't bother to collect that data. So back to my client, they do have a physical disability, so I'm going to answer yes. Now, regardless of the answer to the question, I'm immediately now going to go over to the HUD verification link. And you'll notice right next to it is an angry looking red triangle. And that is an alert telling us this chart is not completed and it doesn't jive with the question. So I'm going to click that link, and you'll notice it opens up a handy chart for me. I have all of the different disability types recognized by HUD and most granting agencies, and answers whether that person does indeed have that disability. All the dots are in the incomplete column right now, and we know that's why that red triangle is appearing there. We know we're not going to put any dots in this column, data not collected, but we do need to put dots in the others. So we're going to choose those. My client has told me they have a physical disability, and when I click one of them, another window pops up. and it's the database giving us a chance to describe that disability. Well, I'm not going to. We don't usually gather private information like that because of the visibility on our database. Everyone can see into this record that has access to our database, and that's just too much private information. So we're not going to make any notes there. You can leave all that the way it is and just push save, and you'll notice a pencil shows up over there, and that answer has been marked as yes. Now the answer is no to all the rest of these, so I'm going to go ahead and click all of those. And if you're a video game veteran, you'll notice this is a lot like a video game. I'm clicking all these dots right now. If you like doing that, it's totally an easy way to fill out this chart. On the next chart, though, I'll show you a little trick to make it easier. So I double check my chart. I've got my one yes for physical disability, no's in the rest of the columns. I'm going to push save and exit. And now when I return to my assessment, you'll notice that there's a nice green check mark next to HUD verification, indicating that the chart's filled out and that it is in agreement with the question up here. All right, so we'll move on down. The next question is this client covered by health insurance? And once again, in my case, it is yes. My client is receiving OHP, which is our state health insurance. It's part of Medicaid. So once again, regardless of the answer, I'm going to immediately go to the HUD verification chart. And you'll notice we have all those incomplete answers again. Well, to save some time, I'm going to move all of them to one column. Most of the answers are going to be no, so I push no, and you'll notice all the dots move over there. It's a little time saver. And then all I need to do is click yes in front of the one kind of insurance that they're receiving. So I save a little time. Unless you like clicking those little dots, by all means, go crazy. So I'm going to push save and exit again, and I'm back to, but you'll notice I can come back and I can double check again that I have an answer of yes, that they are covered by health insurance, and my HUD verification table looks happy. So I'm going to come down to income next. Now, you'll notice there's two questions there, percentage of AMI, which is the area median income, and we'll do that in the second step of this chart. So they ask, do they have income from any source? And in my case, I'm going to say yes. My client has reported they do get some income. But remember, regardless of the answer, I immediately go to the HUD verification table. And if they didn't have any income, I would just push no, and all of those would go to no, and I'd be done. My client does get a little earned income. So I'm going to use that same trick. I'm going to move all those to no's, and I find the section for earned income. I'm going to push yes. Now, once again, a little menu will pop up asking us to describe that. Well, the only thing we have to put in there is the monthly amount. So my client makes $1,230 a month. Now we need that amount in there to calculate area median income. The rest of this you can just leave blank. Once again, too much information in a big database, not a good thing. So I'm just going to put the amount, and we'll come back to our database. After I push save and exit, I return to my chart, and you'll notice that we've got a yes answer for income, and the green check mark is there indicating that the chart's been filled out. Now I can have the database do a quick calculation for me if I click this button that says view gross income, and that's $14,760 a year. Now it's nice to know that, because the second question up here that we need to work on now is the percentage of area median income. Now that's based on your community, and they have different amounts for different family sizes. So reach out to the staff at your agency and figure out how you do that calculation. But it is very likely most of our clients are going to be at 30% or less, but it is important because it does distinguish people for their eligibility in certain programs. Now my client is at 30% or less. So I'm done with that chart. I'm ready to move on. The next one is non-cash benefits. And so this client does get a non-cash benefit known as SNAP, which is also food stamps. So I'm going to say yes. And when I click the HUD verification table, you'll notice that there's a variety of options there. TANF, a couple different TANF sources, and SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. So I'm going to use my same trick I've been using. I'm going to push all the dots to no and click the one yes dot in front of SNAP. Now we don't ask the amount they get It's just important that we track whether they get those different services or not. And I come back and you'll notice there's a nice green check mark next to the HUD verification table. So now all 4 tables are done and I can move on to the other parts of my assessment. In that example, we had a pretty easy job in front of us because the client was new to our database and all I had to do was complete those charts for the first time. Now, I did promise you that many times you're going to open up an assessment and you're going to notice the charts look like this. Now, there's already data put in there. Well, that data was pulled into your new record. That's the phrase we like to say. And pulled in means that someone else in our database, at another agency maybe, entered this person into a project. And you'll notice what was true about that client on this date is in the database now. And we need to enter the same information about our client for our program. So it's important to note that right now I'm putting this in on February 5th. Well, what's true about my client may or may not be the same. Well, if it is, in this case, I would leave that chart. Because later when I push verify and then save and exit on this record, it's going to put a stamp on it that says what's true about that person now. So when I look at my client intake paperwork, I need to double check to see if anything's changed. So in this scenario, I'm going to talk about my client. They had reported back on September 23rd that they had a physical disability, and in the subsequent months, they have been diagnosed with a chronic health condition. And so you'll notice in the chart it says no right now. So that was true on September 23rd. In this case, I'm going to need to modify this chart. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go in there and we're going to put an end on the no answer for chronic health condition. And then we're going to start a new record that says yes. So I can do this in a variety of ways. So there's a pencil there, and so that means that any time in a database you see that pencil, that means you can go in there and edit. But I do also like to show people that there's a way of looking at the whole chart by clicking on the magnifying glass. And it's helpful sometimes if you're working with someone who has an extensive presence or record in our database that you can see all the different edits that have been made. So you can see that they have this physical disability, and that's still true, but the chronic health condition record is not true anymore. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to edit that record. Now, it started the first time someone put the client into the database, and it's going to end on the day before we interviewed them. So my agency, we interviewed them on the 5th, and we determined then that they have a chronic health condition. So I need to end that no answer. So I'll save that. And you'll notice there's now an end date there. But this table is incomplete now because the database doesn't know if this person has a chronic health condition. So I'm going to add a record. That disability type is going to be a chronic health condition. Starting on this date, they do. It is a yes. Right? I don't need to put any more information in there. And I definitely don't need to put an end date because that is true from now on. So the database will look at this and say, starting on March 5th, this person has a chronic health condition. So it's kind of helpful to note that the original one should expire or end at least a day before the new one starts. That makes the database happy. So if I push exit, you'll note that I come back out and that chart has been updated. But there's a little red triangle there, so that means I need to go in there and see why isn't it happy. Well, it needs to confirm that. So I'm going to put a yes there in the chart, and now we exit, and you notice that the red triangle has gone away. Now, there's always more than one way to complete these charts. That's the simplest way that I've found, but I bet as you do your work, you'll find lots of different ways to make the charts happy. What's important is that we do have a accurate snapshot of this person on this date. Now, There's nothing has changed about their health insurance, so I can move on. And there has been a very slight change in their income. So we're going to go in there and we're going to look at that chart as well. So I can go into monthly income, and you'll notice that this person didn't have any income until January 21st. Then they got a job and they started making some money on January 22nd, and they're currently still making $1,250 a month. So that's accurate. Now, this person has just recently started receiving some pension benefits. So I'm going to go to this record. This is pension, and I'm going to go ahead and edit that just like we did before. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say on March the 4th, when we interviewed this person, they've reported to us that they are now getting some pension benefits. So I'm going to put an end to that no answer, just like we did before with that other record. And now I'm going to add a new one starting on the 5th. And it's their pension income. And they're now making $470 a month from that pension income. The answer is going to be yes, and it starts here on March 5th. And once again, I don't need to fill in any more information than that. So when I push save, that bit of income now will be added to their total. So if I exit and I go out and I do a view gross income, their income should be reflective of those two sources. Right? So that is still probably less than 30% of area median income for my community. So that chart's done and it's happy. There's no red triangle there. I'm ready to move on. They have no changes in non-cash benefits. Okay, they were getting SNAP before and they're still getting SNAP. So I'm ready to move on to the next part of my assessment. Now we're going to get to the section of our assessment that deals with the homelessness history of our client. So the first question asks, what was their prior living situation? And we usually define that as where did they stay the night before they came to our program? And when you pull that menu down, you'll see there is a long list of options. In the case of my client, they were camping out in the forest, so they were in a place not meant for habitation. That'll be very common. That means camping out. That means living in a car or an RV without hookups, abandoned buildings, places like that. They might have been in another emergency shelter or any of these other options. But this is a very common one for shelter work. So they were in a place not meant for habitation. Now, the next series of questions attempts to determine if they are chronically homeless. And that is an important characteristic, and so we want to be as accurate as we can about these dates and these times. So we want to know what was the length of stay in that previous place. How long were they in a place not meant for habitation? Well, sadly, my client was out there for a very long time, over a year. Now, people have a hard time remembering the exact dates that they became unhoused, but we want to do the best that we can. And my client told me that it was about the middle of January in 2024. So I'm going to enter that data. Now, the next two questions also ask another characteristics of being unhoused. Now it says, regardless of where they stayed last night, the number of times the client has been on the streets in an emergency shelter or safe haven in the past 3 years, including today. Well, that was 2 times for this client. And then total number of months homeless or on the street in the past 3 years. And this client tells me more than 12 months. Now, because people are different and there are many different situations, those answers may vary widely. But what we're trying to do is accomplish, the identification if that person is chronically homeless. And they can become, that characteristic can be identified depending on different variations of answers on these questions. So do your best to get accurate information and always fill in all of those fields. Next, we're just identifying where our continuum of care is. And so in that menu, we are always going to put Central Oregon, 503. The current county that they're residing in. This person is from Deschutes County, and they are from Terrebonne. Now, if my client has a past address or their last residence, you can go ahead and add that information here by clicking Add and then filling in the fields, but in my case, they do not. We're going to finish up this assessment with the last few questions. Are they a survivor of domestic violence? And that's a yes or no answer, or client doesn't know, client prefers not to answer. In this case, it's a no. But if you do answer yes, you'll notice that you're asked to answer the next two questions. If they are a survivor of domestic violence, we want to know, when did that experience occur? And are they currently fleeing from that domestic violence situation? And if they are, we're going to want to talk to the staff that related to your HMIS and your services, because they may need to be referred to a different agency if they are currently fleeing from a domestic violence situation. We just want to make sure that we handle that in a sensitive and private manner. Reach out to your agency if you need some guidance on that. But in my case, for this example, this person is not a survivor of domestic violence, so I put no. Then we want to know what was the last grade they completed, and my client was a high school graduate. Their household size is 1, and their level of income, this is another level of income measurement, they're up to 50% because they didn't have an income. Well, I'm all the way to the bottom, and you're going to want to make sure that you do a double check that you filled all of the fields in. Sometimes you just have to check them to make sure they're accurate. Other times you'll need to put information in there. We want to make sure that our HUD verification tables have been completed or updated, and they're happy. And if that's the case, we push Save and Exit. And you'll notice when I come back to my inventory, my person, there she is. She's in room number 1, bed number 1. So I'll bet you can guess what's going to happen next in this training session. Someone's going to move out of our shelter, aren't they? So depending on your type of shelter, they might move out every day or just occasionally, but the process will be the same. We're going to start out at our main menu, and just for review, I'll remind you all our shelter work needs to be done over here in the Shelters module, so I'm going to click Shelters. And once again, I'm going to pick the shelter from my menu, and I'm going to go to the Client Check-In box. And you'll notice this is where all the clients are that are currently checked into our shelter. And today we're here to say goodbye to experimental client. They are moving on, and so I'm going to need to check them out. And I just go to the far left side of their record again. You see the unit inventory is here, and you see a little red minus on the bed now. Well, I'm going to check them out. So when I click that, I get a new unit data field that pops up, and I have a chance now to just double check that I'm checking them out with today. My computer pulled today's date in there, but always keep in mind you could go back and change that if you are updating records. Some folks and some shelters do have supplies that they give out, and this is a chance to say yes or no whether they turned them in. And next we have 2 required questions. When you see those little asterisks, that means they must be answered. So we need to tell our database why were they leaving. Well, in this case, my client is moving on to another housing opportunity, so they have completed our program. And that might be the answer in many cases. If it's a night-by-night shelter and they got a bed for the night, the next morning they're done. They're completing their program. They're moving on. But you can see there are a lot of stories in the world, so there's a lot of different things that can happen, a lot of different reasons people move on. But our person, they completed the program, and then we need to know their destination. Of course, HUD and all of our granting agencies want to see what happens with people after they leave our care, and our person is going into a rental situation. So it's a rapid rehousing program in this. So they're going to a rental by the client with an ongoing housing subsidy. So there are a variety of situations. You just want to get to know your clients and reach out to fellow staff members if you have a hard time picking one of these destinations. Now there are some others down there. No exit interview completed is one. That does happen. Sometimes people just leave and we don't get to interview them and find out where they went. And that's particularly true in night-by-night shelters, so that'll be an option. Those aren't great options, neither is other, but we do want to be as accurate as we can. So my client, they're going to a rental with an ongoing housing subsidy. And what is that rent? I get a bonus question now. If I do choose something that has a housing subsidy, we want to know what kind. And so this is a rapid rehousing program. So you'll see there are a variety of different subsidies that people can get, and it helps them with their rent. All right, I'm going to come on down, and you'll notice I'm in an assessment again. So this time I have my exit assessment, and it's very similar to the situation we talked about before. We want to capture now the data. What is true about this person today on March 5th as they're leaving our project? Now, they are still the head of household. They're still themselves. And we come to those very famous HUD verification tables. And if anything has changed about my client, I need to go in there and modify that table. And you can look at the previous section when we talked about modifying the tables. It's very similar on an exit. So if something has changed about my client, if they have been diagnosed with another disability, or we would need to go in there and put an end to a no answer and start a yes answer. Same thing is true about all of the HUD verification tables. So review that section and reach out to your HMIS staff if you need some help with that. But in the case of my client, they've only been here in this shelter for a month. None of these things have changed. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll on down. I don't have a permanent address yet, so I don't need to fill in that section. And I'm going to push save and exit, and that will then check that person out of our shelter, and that room is now available for another client. Well, I hope this has given you a chance to get some insight into entering and exiting people from your shelter. If you need any more guidance, of course, you're always welcome to reach out to me at Neighbor Impact. I'm Don Carter. My email is donc@neighborimpact.org. It'll be the last screen you see on this video, and interface with any staff members you have at your agency. And let's all work together to make sure that we are making good, accurate records as we help people on their journey through unhoused situations into situations where they are in a safe and stable place. Thank you for your work, and keep in touch.